Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a Supreme Court case that really makes you think. When you win a lawsuit, what is that money actually for? This story draws a really sharp line between what's considered justice and what looks more like a jackpot. So let's dive into this. Just imagine, you go through this whole long, draining legal battle. The court rules in your favor. But when you see the check, you think, wait, that's it? This isn't just a hypothetical. This is the real story of one man's fight for a whole lot more. And this story starts with a man named Joseph Anthony Alejandro. He successfully sued the Philippine Commercial International Bank. So, he won. Case closed, right? Well, not for him. For him, the fight was really just getting started. He basically argued that the first amount the court gave him didn't even come close to covering the harm that was done. And look, he wasn't just asking for a little extra. He took his demand for a much, much bigger payout all the way to the highest court in the land. So just how big was the gap between what the court first gave him and what he was demanding now? Well, when you see the numbers, the difference is, well, it's pretty staggering. What's just wild here is the scale of these increases. I mean, look at this. He's asking for 10 times the moral damages, 5 times the attorney's fees. But nominal damages, that's a 40-fold increase. This was not some minor appeal. He was essentially asking the court to completely rewrite his victory into a blockbuster win. Okay, so with demands like that on the table, the big question is, what did the Supreme Court have to say about all this? So, how'd they rule? On that first demand, the one for $5 million in moral damages, the court's answer was a firm no.
And what about that request to bump up nominal damages to $2 million? Denied again. The court actually called it excessive.
The $1 million for attorney's fees? You can probably guess. That was denied too.
And finally, his request to increase the exemplary damages? Also rejected. A total clean sweep. The court denied every single one of his requests.
A complete shutout. But you know, this wasn't just some random, arbitrary decision. The court's reasoning here is like a masterclass in why these different types of damages even exist in the first place. So let's really get into the why behind this verdict. We're going to deconstruct the court's thinking on each denial one by one. And as we do, you'll start to see this really powerful legal logic that connects everything. First up, moral damages. You can think of this as the court trying to compensate for the human cost, right? The emotional toll of an ordeal, all the anxiety, the sleepless nights, the humiliation. It's their attempt to put a price tag on suffering. And this quote right here, it gets right to the heart of it. Mr. Alejandro claimed he suffered, untold humiliation, but he didn't bring in any witnesses or any real evidence to back that up. So in the eyes of the law, it's not enough to just say you suffered. You've got to show it. And that's the key takeaway here. If you want to be compensated for emotional suffering, you have to prove it with actual evidence. The court isn't there to just hand out money because you say you feel bad. It's there to compensate for a proven injury. All right, next we've got nominal damages, which are a totally different animal. See, these aren't about compensating you for a loss. They're more symbolic. It's a small amount the court gives to say, yes, your rights were violated, even if it didn't cost you a ton of money. So here, the court used a pretty clear yardstick. His bank accounts were frozen for 2 months. They decided that $50,000 was a reasonable amount to recognize that violation for that period of time. But $2 million? In their view, that was completely out of proportion to what actually happened. Okay, so what about that request to get 5 times the original amount for attorney's fees? His argument was that his lawyer was so prominent that it justified a much bigger award. The court basically had a 2-part answer to this. First, it's a procedural thing. You can't just bring up new evidence about how great your lawyer is after the trial is over. That stuff has to be established during the main event. And second, they felt the case itself just wasn't complicated enough to justify a $1 million legal fee. Now, before we hit that final point, it's super important to understand this distinction. Moral damages are all about compensating the victim for what they went through. But exemplary damages, they're about punishing the defendant to stop them and anyone else from ever doing it again. And honestly, you can't say it any better than the court's own powerful words right here. The goal isn't to make the person who sued rich or to bankrupt the company they sued. The whole point is to send a message to society that this kind of behavior is not okay.
And so in the end, the court looked at that original $500,000 award and said, you know what? That's enough. It was already a strong enough message to the bank to serve as that deterrent without going overboard.
So when you step back and connect the dots through all of these denials, what's the one big, powerful principle that ties it all together? Well, it really comes down to the fundamental purpose of the court system itself. This case really shows us where the judiciary draws that line. Justice is about making a victim whole again, and it's about discouraging bad behavior, all based on evidence and reason. It is not a lottery ticket. For the court, the path to a fair reward isn't paved with big, flashy numbers, but with solid proof and a clear legal purpose for every single dollar.